considerations you will have to factor in. Today we have Billy Tran as our main presenter once again, and to back him up we have Vadim Kagan. They're both from Gemalto EMV Field Marketing. Please feel free to type any questions or chat into the chat box, and we're going to get ready to start, and we're going to answer all your questions at the end of the webinar. Are you ready, Billy?
I am. Hello, everyone. Thanks, Amy, and thanks to you all for joining us today to learn about what I know must be everyone's favorite subject, EMV. Again, my name is Billy Tran. I am part of the marketing team here at Gemalto. In my role, I primarily focus on EMV and the U.S. marketplace. So for those of you listening today, I guess you're all well aware of the October 2015 liability shift date, which is less than a year away. The majority of you, I guess, have started or are in the process of launching your EMV programs. When I go out to the marketplace and listen to our clients, I generally hear the same types of questions and concerns. What do I do? How do I get started with my EMV program? So the goal of this webinar today is really to give you all a foundational understanding of EMV and the kind of questions you should be considering at this point as you launch your EMV projects. So as an issuer, I think the first action you need to take, if you haven't already done so, is to reach out to your processors and ask them, are they ready to support EMV? Because obviously you can't begin issuing EMV cards until your processor is really ready to support those types of transactions. From there, your processor may tell you, yes, they're ready to support EMV, in which case, you're good to go. If your processor isn't ready, most likely they'll give you a timeline for when they will be ready and when it makes sense for you to begin launching your project. Assuming your processor is ready to support EMV, the next concept or term you'll need to be aware of is something called an EMV profile. It's a term that you'll probably hear throughout the industry, people talking about this EMV profile. So in the next few slides, I'll go into a little bit more detail about what is an EMV profile, what that means to your processor, and ultimately how that impacts you as an issuer and the type of EMV cards you'll need to procure. So what is this EMV profile? Essentially, it's a list of settings, and how you configure those settings will determine how your card behaves on the field. You can think of an EMV profile as simply a recipe for how your EMV card will work. There's generally lots of industry jargon when people talk about an EMV profile. You've probably heard things like online, offline, SDA, DDA, PIN, no PIN, CVM. These are all, let's say, the ingredients that go into an EMV profile. But in fact, there's actually dozens and dozens of individual settings that comprise a complete EMV profile. So as an issuer, you have a few options. You can certainly open up the EMV spec and individually define and customize each of these configuration settings. But to be honest, that's fairly complicated. Even if you have a technical background and a banking background, figuring out how to set up each of these individual settings is no easy task. So the networks, the payment networks, MasterCard and Visa, have all realized that this is fairly complicated. So what they've done is attempted to simplify this by defining, off-the-shelf standard profiles for the U.S. market in different markets around the world. So as an issuer, what you need to do is you'll need to reach out to your processor and ask them, which standard profiles they'll support. They'll probably support a certain number of profiles for MasterCard, a certain number of profiles for Visa off the shelf. And they'll probably give you a roadmap for when they'll support all of them, or they may only support have a roadmap to support a certain number specifically geared towards the U.S. market. But obviously, then the next question is, well, which EMV profile do I pick? So when it comes to making decisions around which EMV profile to pick, I think it's important to have at least a basic understanding about how an EMV transaction works. So in the next few slides, I'll go into a little bit more detail about how an EMV transaction really works on the field. So when we talk about an EMV transaction, I think it's first important to understand how a magstripe transaction works today. So as most of you are probably well aware, today in a traditional magstripe card, you'll have your cardholder information stored on that magnetic stripe. And in that magnetic stripe, you'll have the account number, the cardholder's name, maybe the expiration date, and a CVV number. When you swipe that card at the point of sale, all this information gets transmitted through the point of sale to the processor's authorization system. The authorization system will check that information and either accept or decline that transaction. The problem with that mechanism is that all the information on your magnetic stripe card is fixed, meaning someone can easily take that information, put it onto a counterfeit card, and use it at a merchant or a point of sale. And from the authorization point of view, there's no way to distinguish a real card from a counterfeit card. So it's very easy to obviously implement fraud on a magnetic stripe card. Conversely, when you look at an EMV transaction, when you dip an EMV chip card into the point of sale, the chip begins a conversation between the point of sale and the issuer's authorization system. And the goal of that conversation and exchange of data between the card and the point of sale is to really do three things. And you can really break down an EMV transaction into three basic steps. The first step of an EMV transaction is you have to verify that the card is a real card. It's not a card that I've made in my garage. The second step of an EMV transaction is to verify that you are in fact the real owner or owner of that particular payment card. And then after you've done those two checks, the final step of an EMV transaction is to either authorize or decline that transaction. So you'll hear, in terms of EMV profile, you'll hear different terminologies. And we're going to go through some terms that you'll probably hear as prevalent terms in the industry today. And the first that you've probably all heard is something called chip and signature online only. And this is generally a profile or EMV chip configuration that is generally promoted by the Visa part of the world. And so the way a chip and signature online only card works is, again, if we look at these three steps, you start by verifying that the card is real. And the way you verify that the card is real is that the cardholder will dip their card into the point of sale. In real time, that chip will go online and talk to the issuer's authorization system and make do a series of checks to determine that the card is in fact an authentic card and not a fraudulent card made by someone in their garage. And that can only be done in real time as an online conversation between the card and the issuer's authorization system. Next, to verify that the cardholder is genuine, instead of using a PIN, they're saying that signature is a preferred method of verifying that the cardholder is in fact the genuine cardholder. And then finally, to authorize this transaction, again, you'll have a conversation between the chip and the issuer's authorization system to either accept or decline that transaction. And again, that's only done in real time at the point of transaction through an online communication between the card and the issuer's authorization system. So there's different pros and cons to an EMV chip profile that's been defined this way. In terms of the pros, you have the highest level of security that is offered by EMV. There's really no risk of fraud in this transaction because you're really doing all the possible checks you can to determine that the card is a genuine card. In terms of cons, we all know that signature isn't really the best way to verify that a card holder is in fact the real owner of that particular card. And the other downside of this approach is that the cards will not work at offline point-of-sale environments. So at certain places abroad in different parts of the world, point-of-sales aren't connected 100% through the issuer's online authorization system. And in those situations, a chip and signature online-only card will not work. The next, let's say, very prevalent EMV profile that's being discussed in the marketplace today is something called the chip and pin online preferring card. And so again, we'll kind of go through the three steps of an EMV transaction and kind of talk about the impact of this type of EMV profile on each of these steps. So again, we start with verifying that the card is authentic, that the card is real. And to do this, when you dip the card at the point of sale has the option to really communicate online in real time, again, to verify that the card is real. Or there's also the option of having the conversation between the card and the point of sale to determine whether the card is in fact genuine, meaning that's an offline transaction, meaning the chip and the point of sale talk to each other to verify that the card is a real card. And sometimes when people talk about offline verification mechanisms, you'll hear the term called SDA and DDA. And so for the purpose of this conversation, you guys don't really need to understand what SDA or DDA means. I think what's most important to understand is that in a chip and pin online preferring card, the chip and the point of sale have the possibility of having an interaction to verify that the card is real. Then once you verify that the card is real, you need to verify that you are in fact the genuine owner of that card. And to do that, they're recommending the use of a PIN. And then finally, to authorize the transaction, the card has two options. You can either, again, go online with the issuer's authorization system, or you can stay offline and negotiate whether to authorize the transaction in real time as a conversation between the chip and the point of sale itself. So you have two options. So in terms of the pros and cons of this approach, again, you have the highest level of security that EMV can provide in terms of fraud. You're protected whether you're in an online environment or an offline environment. In terms of acceptance, you're guaranteed that this card will work at point of sales anywhere, whether it's in the US or Europe or somewhere in Asia. And obviously, we all know that the use of a PIN is a stronger mechanism for verifying that a cardholder is in fact the owner of that particular card. The downside of this approach is generally around consumer confusion. Today, the use of a PIN is fairly standard in debit cards, but certainly for credit cards, there really aren't any credit cards in the market today that use a PIN. And so, and in fact, many people have multiple credit cards in their wallet probably. And I think it's clearly identified as an issue of whether a consumer will be able to remember multiple PINs across multiple credit cards today. So just to recap a little bit, chip and signature cards are great. They'll work at any online point of sale environments. They provide the highest level of security that EMV can provide in terms of verifying that the card is real. The downside is that you're going to have acceptance problems in different parts of the world which are offline or at unattended point of sale environments. So where are these online and offline point of sale environments? So if you go to Canada or Mexico or Singapore, for example, you'll have no problems. Mostly all three of these environments are 100% online environments, meaning you can take your chip and signature online only card to any of these environments and you should not have any acceptance issues. However, if you take your chip and signature online only card to parts of Europe such as Paris or France, Spain, or the UK, you'll have a mixture of online and offline point of sale infrastructure. I can speak from personal experience. Gemalto is an international company. We have offices all around the world, and when I travel every once in a while to Paris, there's a fairly significant offline point of sale infrastructure, and I have several chip and signature online only cards, and if I take it to a subway station or a toll booth or different places in Paris, I know that card will not work. So you have to be careful when deploying a chip and signature online only card, and be aware of your cardholder behavior, whether they do travel abroad, because certainly that type of product will have issues in terms of acceptance in parts of Europe. So the question we hear a lot from the marketplace is, why should we enable offline capability when in the US we're predominantly 100% online payment environment? And I think that's a valid question, but I would ask you all to think about the last time you went to a big box merchant with a Magstripe card. And most likely you made a purchase and you swiped your payment card, and almost instantaneously that transaction gets authorized and the receipt gets printed out. And I think it's a question mark whether the merchant 100% of the time takes that magnetic stripe data and goes online to the issuer's authorization system to verify that, that account information. In most cases, what's a fairly common behavior in the U.S. is that the merchant will take that magnetic stripe data, store it somewhere, and pre-approve the transaction. And the reason they do that is to expedite the checkout process, because the process of verifying even a mag stripe account information online in real time is fairly slow. And anything, I think merchants are willing to take the risk of some potential fraud in exchange to expedite the consumer checkout experience. So in our conversations with different issuers in the U.S., we hear that many of them are considering the use of or enabling offline capability for their cards issued to their U.S. consumers. Why? Because they believe that enabling offline capability has a potential to expedite the checkout experience for their consumers at the point of sale. So I was recently at a store with my chip and signature online only card, and this was at this particular merchant. They had already enabled their EMV point of sale. So I inserted my card, and the transaction took anywhere from about 20 to 29 seconds. And the reason it took a long time, or fairly long, is because, you know, in real time that chip is having a conversation to verify that the card is real and doing all the necessary checks to authorize that transaction. And so with that, we're hearing more and more momentum around this idea of contactless cards. And generally, contactless is a fairly controversial topic in the U.S. I know between 2005 and 2010, there was a lot of momentum around the issuance of contactless payment cards, and that momentum really didn't go very far. And the reason was the value proposition of contactless doesn't really exist when you compare it to magnetic stripe cards. You can swipe your magnetic stripe card and it's a fast transaction, or you can tap a contactless card and it's a fast transaction. So the value to the merchant and the value to the consumer really isn't there. But when you consider a mass migration to EMV and contact EMV transactions perhaps not being nearly as fast as a magnetic stripe transaction, this idea of tapping a card contactlessly to expedite the checkout process is certainly has an increased value proposition. But the other challenge with contactless payment is that without an acceptance infrastructure at the merchant side, the issuance of contactless cards doesn't really make sense. The feedback we hear from issuers all the time is, why should I issue a contactless card when they can't use it anywhere? There aren't any merchants that accept contactless transactions, essentially. And that's certainly true. What we see, perhaps, is that with the release of Apple Pay, and you'll see consumer behavior shift towards contactless methods of payment, whether it be by mobile or through a contactless card. So certainly that has the momentum to potentially drive merchant adoption of contactless point of sales. And that's the general trend that we see globally. In other markets that have moved heavily towards dual interface or contactless cards, it takes a critical mass of contactless devices in the marketplace before you see the merchants begin activating their point of sale. But once they've activated that point of sale, consumer preference towards contactless transaction really skyrockets. The slide you see in front of you today is really a case study done in Australia and by a big box merchant. They're called Coles, and that particular merchant had contactless point of sales in all their stores, but they didn't activate them until they saw a certain critical mass of contactless cards in the marketplace. And once that contactless threshold was met, they activated their contactless point of sale, and almost immediately they saw transaction volumes, contactless transaction volumes really skyrocket. And the consumers really, once they start using contactless methods of payment, they really never go back. So once you have an idea of what EMV profile to load, the next question that we hear a lot is, what type of EMV card should I buy? And generally we'll see issuers ask questions like, well, how much memory do I need on my card? What type of operating system should I have? Does the chip support SDA or DDA and CDA? And while those are all valid questions, I don't think they necessarily make sense. They're not the right question to ask because those questions don't really impact the final price of the card. I think the easier way to approach the procurement process is to ask the following 4 questions. Which EMV profile do you want to load on the card? How many cards do you want to buy? What color of chip do you want on the face of the card, and which the general 2 options on the market today are gold and silver. And the last question is, do you want a contact card or a dual interface card, a card with both contact and contactless EMV capability? And really, if you're able to ask those 4 questions or answer those 4 questions and provide that information to any card vendor, they should be able to provide you a quote on which product. Because ultimately, things like memory size, chip operating system, the application version that's loaded onto the chip aren't really relevant. What's really relevant is understanding which EMV profile needs to be on the card, how many cards you need to purchase, and the type of card you want to purchase. But ultimately, those are the only questions you need to be asking your card vendor. So certainly, launching an EMV project isn't just about the EMV profile or what chip to buy. There's also an impact potentially on your artwork design. It'd be unfortunate to put a chip on the card and have that chip block your logo or the card artwork that you worked hard to design. So I would encourage you all to engage your different card vendors, and they should be able to give you a design template similar to what you see here in front of you. It should have the specific dimensions of the chip that they're proposing. They'll have dimensions of the card, and that allows you to gauge and design your artwork design appropriately to make sure that there's no impact to you as you begin launching your EMV program. So finally, a question we hear a lot is, what are the lead times for buying an EMV chip card? And honestly, the answer will vary depending on who you ask. And I can't speak for the entire industry, but I can certainly speak to Gemalto's perspective in terms of chip procurement lead time and card manufacturing. So Gemalto, we are the largest manufacturer of EMV chip cards in the world. Each and every year, we manufacture in excess of 750 payment cards. Of that, close to 650 million EMV chip cards a year. But we don't just manufacture chip cards for the payment industry. We actually manufacture chip cards for the telecommunication industry, the public sector, and all types of different business verticals. So in aggregate, we manufacture close to over 2 billion smart chip card devices every year. And that type of scale is certainly something that puts us in a very advantageous position in terms of serving this marketplace. So we hear a lot about this idea of chip supply, shortages, and extended production lead times, and that certainly may be true. But if you think about the 2 reasons why there would be extended lead times for procuring chip cards, it boils down to 2, let's say, bottlenecks. The first is, does your card vendor have chips available? And the second is, does your card vendor have manufacturing capacity available? So first I'm going to talk about chip supply. So it's true that the US is moving towards EMV, and as is China. So certainly if you don't have chips, you can't manufacture any chip cards. So in general, as an industry, there's 2 ways you can approach securing chips. You can wait till you receive a purchase order from your client, then you can go to the chip manufacturer to buy chips. And in those cases, it's what we call a spot order mechanism. And if you do that, the chip vendor will say, well, we haven't forecasted that order, so your lead time for getting those chips could be anywhere from 16 to 20 weeks. And that's generally a problem. The way Gemalto purchase chips is not, we don't take that approach of spot ordering when we talk about procuring chips. So as I mentioned earlier, each and every year, Gemalto manufactures over 2 billion chips to the marketplace. So what we do is a year in advance, we'll forecast the approximate number of chip cards that we'll issue in the following year. Then we'll pre-buy chips in anticipation of that forecast. And we'll add obviously safety stock. And we'll pre-buy those chips and we'll inventory them at different places around the world. So we'll have the chips on hand to service the market when we know that the demand will happen. So for the U.S. market alone, we have chips that we've pre-bought and are in inventory and waiting to be used. And obviously we have buffer stocks to address any unforecasted volume. So for the U.S. market alone, we have over 18 million modules in stock in case we see some unforecasted spike in volume. So that's, in terms of chip supply, that's generally not an issue for Gemalto. In terms of manufacturing capacity, Gemalto has also the largest manufacturing capacity in the U.S. So in the U.S. alone, we have capacity to manufacture in excess of 250 million to 300 million EMV chip cards every year. Globally, we operate 8 card manufacturing facilities, and those facilities operate the same equipment and have the ability to produce in excess of 800 million EMV chip cards a year. So in the event that we're full in our U.S. manufacturing facility, we can always dynamically shift an order to one of our other facilities to guarantee that we're able to service this market as it moves towards the EMV. And so in terms of lead times, we don't really see much change in terms of standard SLAs for the delivery of cards from what you see in the mag-trade world today. Again, that's the Gemalto perspective, but other card manufacturers may have challenges in terms of chip supply or manufacturing capacity. So with that, I'm going to open it up to questions. Amy?
Thank you, Billy. That was really great. And we're going to pull in Vadim Kagan for the rest of our conversation. He's also with EMV Marketing. And we have a number of questions already, Billy, so I'll just read them off to you, and you guys can take it. Here's one about procurement. Should we buy a large number of card chips now for cost purposes, or a few at a time?
So it is a volume business, and so in general, the larger quantities do have will realize advantageous pricing advantages.
Someone asked about the chip itself. Are there different size chips?
Yes, there are. So there's what's called a 6-pin chip and an 8-pin chip, and there's basically a small chip and a chip that's a little bit fatter, to put it simply. For Gemalto, all our contact EMV chip cards use a small chip, and for our dual interface, we use the larger or fatter chip face. But actually, we're actually in the process of migrating that so that for both contact and dual interface cards, you'll always have the smaller chip size, or the smaller faceplate.
And Billy, I just want to quickly go back to the previous question about the procurement, because what Billy said about the volumes and the cost benefits of buying a larger quantity of chips is absolutely correct. But of course, the two other factors that you want to keep in mind is the strategy which you will undertake in terms of reissuing EMV cards for your portfolio, and whether or not you will plan to perform a mass reissue, or whether you're going to follow the natural reissue cycle and issue EMV cards to your card holders as their current mag stripes expire. So of course, it might be a little more hand-holding and administrative overhead to kind of keep on top of the inventory, but that might be one way to go. And of course, and Billy, maybe you can talk about this some more, the other thing that you need to remember about the EMV cards and chips is that the inventory that you buy has an expiration date to it. So if you do purchase more cards than you can issue before those EMV cards expire, you might be left, with the responsibility for the leftover inventory.
I'm glad you brought that up, Vadim, because as you were talking about, 3 people asked questions about chips expiring and left on the shelf and that kind of thing. So that seems to be a concern. Also, they're asking the average price per EMV card. Can you guys talk about that?
Well, I'll let Billy kind of chime in more on the expiration dates and what drives that and how you can manage this in general. But as far as pricing is concerned, it's a difficult question to answer, again, because the price does vary depending on the quantity of the order. I think if you had to look at pricing for budgeting purposes, you would either double the cost of your, let me back up a little, you would probably look at about $3 a card on average. But of course, again, the actual pricing that you will be looking at will depend on those 4 variables that Billy mentioned in his presentation and the quantity of your order.
That's exactly right, Vadim. And I would encourage, to get a specific code, I would encourage you all to reach out to your individual sales rep, and they can ask you those 4 questions and look at your specific needs and provide a quote accordingly.
Here's
But
a
back
question
to the
about the technology behind it. Someone asked if several credit unions could come together and order chips together to keep their costs down. Are they able to share chips? I didn't think you could do that.
Certainly, whenever
it's a good question.
You're able. Go ahead, Vadim.
Yeah, sorry, Bill. Yeah, so I think it's not something that we are seeing being done or considered right now, but it's an intriguing idea. In theory, it is possible. However, there are some constraints and boundaries that we would need to consider. Certainly one on the artwork side, and whether the multiple credit unions are willing to share the same design and then effectively share the custom inventory. And of course, they all also need to be working with the same processor and using the same EMV profile definition to make sure that the actual production would be one and the same. But it's certainly something that we'd be very interested to explore further.
It sounds really great in theory, but now when you talk about all the things that have to be exactly the same for that to work, it's not that easy.
Right.
We have a couple questions here about the chips. Let me see. Oh, how do contactless cards limit fraud if the transaction can still be used via internet or telephone?
So I would say that challenge isn't limited to contactless cards. Certainly, the account number is still printed on the face of the card, and someone can always take that number and use it for card not present or internet-based transactions. So EMV is a great solution for eliminating fraud at the point of sale. There are ways you can use EMV as a tool to address card not present fraud with the use of readers and the generation of one-time passwords. But the reality is today that type of implementation does require some work by online merchants like your Amazons of the world or Barnes & Nobles online. But certainly the idea of taking a number that's printed on the card and using it for a card not present transaction still exists in an EMV or non-EMV world.
We have another question here. Are chip cards issued with a standard 2-year, 3-year, or 4-year expiration option?
So yes, so in terms of expiration date, that's really at the issuer's discretion whether they want to limit it to being a 3-year reissue cycle, a 4-year reissue cycle, or less or more. So yes, that's still certainly valid, but it's at the issuer's discretion.
Here's one again about the liability shift, and we talked about this, Billy, in the last webinar in more detail. So someone's asking who is liable for fraud if the institution has chip cards, but the fraudster duplicates the information and uses it without the chip.
Oh, so that's actually a great question. So as you all probably know, there's even with these chip cards, there's still a magnetic stripe on the back, which a bad guy could potentially take the data off the mag stripe and try to create a duplicate card. What's interesting about an EMV chip card is that even though the mag stripe still has certain account information, there's a special code inside the mag stripe that will tell the point of sale, no, this is a chip card, and it will force the fraudster to attempt to dip the card into the point of sale and use the chip. But because they've created, it's impossible to fake the information that's on the chip, it would basically block that transaction from happening. So while it is technically possible for someone to skim the mag stripe, it's still not, you can't use that mag stripe to create a duplicate EMV chip card.
I have some questions about some of the terminology. They want to know what the CVM is, and can you explain preferring? I don't know what that means exactly. I've never heard that one, preferring. Have you heard that, Billy, that expression?
Right. So CVM refers to cardholder verification method, and so that's basically the step I mentioned in my presentation about the preference for which mechanism is used to verify that the cardholder is the owner of that card, and that could be the use of a signature, it could be the use of a PIN, or it could be actually avoiding that step as well. And so in terms of preference, you, in your definition of your EMV profile, have the ability to determine when the user is prompted for a PIN and when they're prompted, if they're prompted for a signature, or if they're not prompted at all.
Someone says if the U.S. is moving to chip and PIN, is that available, or is it just chip and signature?
Both options are certainly available, but it's sort of at the discretion of the issuer as to which option they want to issue to the marketplace. It comes down to sort of the pros and cons I talked about before. It's a question.
Yeah, and I think I would add that while it is at the discretion of the issuer, you're also need to be confirming whether your processor will support the profiles that allow for the chip and PIN methodology, because some of the profiles that certain processors choose to support, at least initially, for the October 2015 deadline, are specific to one particular verification method.
Exactly right.
And then someone asked a question about the difference in price for contact versus contactless.
Well, I think it's fairly intuitive that the dual interface cards are more expensive than the contact cards, because effectively the dual interface cards allow for both the contact and the contactless transactions. I would probably not venture out to specify by how much the contactless cards are more expensive, but it's in a vicinity of probably doubling up on the cost.
And then we have a question about the data itself being protected. Can we say loosely that this will help to protect card user information from data breaches in the future?
Yes. I mean, in general, even if a fraudster was to try to steal the information that's used in the middle of an EMV transaction, it would be basically useless because they couldn't take that information to create a duplicate card. So it really takes the value away or takes any motivation for a fraudster to try to attempt to steal account information through an EMV transaction.
And then a question about Apple Pay. I thought this would be a lot of questions about Apple Pay. Do we need the dual EMV card if we do Apple Pay?
So, so the dual interface card is a card that can do a contact and a contactless transaction. Apple Pay is sort of taking that same functionality of a contactless card and putting it onto your Apple phone. And but Apple Pay is still EMV, in fact. So the mechanism for doing the transaction used by Apple Pay is 100% EMV.
Yeah, and just to clarify, so in order to participate in the Apple Pay programs, you do not have to have your cards issued as dual interface, right? Because as Billy just mentioned, the iPhone itself performs the, takes on the responsibility for performing the contactless transactions. It's just that it's routed through your card account. Amy, I see a question in the chat window about the difference between the gold and the silver chip, and
oh yeah,
Billy, feel free to correct me, but there is no functional difference. It really is more aesthetics and which color of the chip works best with your artwork on the card. And I also see a question about what merchants need to do in order to actually enable the contactless functionality on their point of sale devices. Again, I believe it is at their discretion, and there might be some coordination with the acquirer that they're working with. But yeah, it's certainly something that the merchants do have the control of.
And then we have a question, does the chip do anything to prevent fraud done with the actual card number itself? So I guess they're talking about online again, maybe online purchasing?
Yeah. Sort of the same question. So during an EMV transaction, the actual account number is not it becomes not relevant during an EMV transaction, but certainly someone can always read the account number off the face of the card and attempt to make a transaction for an online card not present transaction online.
And then someone just wants a little clarification about Apple Pay again. He wants to say, are you saying that the issuer must have an EMV card to do Apple Pay? And I don't think they do. It just, isn't it in your account setting on your phone?
Yeah, Billy, feel free to correct me again, but no, I don't believe that EMV card is a prerequisite for participation in the Apple Pay that you can have, because of course, that was the whole premise of Apple having millions of the cards on file with their iTunes subscribers, basically being up and running out of the gate with Apple Pay. So of course, we should not be assuming that all of those cards were EMV enabled.
And also we have a question here about somebody saying that they've seen some information that fraudsters are able to tap a wallet or someone's purse and steal information, and that some places are offering a special card carrier to protect the card. Is there truth in this, or is this just kind of talk?
So with, let's say, the first generation of contactless cards that were introduced into the marketplace in the early 2000 timeframe, those were non-EMV contactless cards, and which means that inside the antenna was the cardholder's magnetic stripe information, and as you tapped those cards at the point of sale, it would just the point of sale would simply treat that information that they've received as a magnetic stripe transaction. And so certainly if it did open up the possibility of having someone with a contactless pocket reader attempt to skim that information off of the cardholder's wallet without them knowing. What we're talking about is EMV contactless. employs all the security mechanisms of EMV just in a contactless form factor. So while you could, I've seen some interesting envelopes or things that you can, they're basically shields that don't allow that block any contactless information from leaving your card while it's in your wallet. That's certainly an option, but with an EMV contactless product, you're still employing all the same security mechanisms as a contact EMV, which was not the case in the, let's say, first generation contactless products that were introduced into the market in the mid-2000s.
Here's one just about the process to get to start. What is needed to initiate the program and get approval with MasterCard? Are there instructions? Are there forms? I know a lot of people are looking to Shoreline to give them some guidance, so what would you guys say some first steps would be?
So typically the project with the brand is initiated by the processor. I think what we recommend to all of our clients is to engage with the processors and open a project with them. The processors will then engage the brand, and initiate the project with Visa or MasterCard to validate a specific issuer program. The times of that validation may vary, depending on whether you're first in line or whether someone has gone through that process before you and used the same EMV profile settings as you would like, because then you potentially could benefit from someone having done all the heavy lifting, and you can streamline your project timeline based on that. So that really is a recommendation, to go to engage with your processor, to open an EMV project with them, and of course, make sure that you understand the timelines and the various work streams that would be involved in the migration in general.
I just want to let everybody know we're going to provide a PDF of the presentation, and we're going to provide answers to all the questions. So we'll have Vadim and Billy write something up because we're getting a lot of questions. I want to make sure that everybody has their questions answered. Can a card have both chip and PIN, chip and signature, or do you have to choose one of these profiles? And does that mean a customer would only be able to use the card as a PIN, or they would only use it as a signature-based transaction? So they're wondering, can there be flexibility there?
Yes. So this goes back to the question about the CVM preference that we discussed earlier. You have the option to determine as an issuer when a PIN is prompted or a signature is prompted. Those are all, let's say, parameters that would be within your EMV profile that you're able to work with your processor to define.
And there's a question about expired cards. There was a reference to expired cards during the conversation regarding ordering card stock. So they want to know, does stock for EMV cards expire before they are issued? Could that happen?
Yes. So with EMV products, it's sort of every card manufacturer will have an expiration for when they're able to manufacture a certain product, and that's defined by Visa and MasterCard. It's sort of like the milk that you have in your refrigerator. That milk has an expiry date that's defined by the manufacturer of that milk about when you can still use it. Similarly, Visa and MasterCard impose those same rules on card stock. So when you make your purchase of cards and store them in inventory, you should ask your card vendor for what's called an LOA, or a letter of approval, which is the document explaining the life expectancy of those particular cards, and those cards may expire sometime in 2016 or 2017. That just means that as an issuer, you have until a certain period to issue those cards into the marketplace. Those cards will certainly still work once they're in the field, but by Visa and MasterCard rules, if a card has passed its expiry date, or a certification expiry date, then you can no longer issue those cards into the market without some sort of waiver that's only issued by Visa and MasterCard.
We're getting a lot of really good questions. We're being inundated, I know, in the media with EMV online, and so it's really great. Someone has read that when EMV was implemented in Europe, online fraud doubled. How will we fight that and protect ourselves as an issuer?
So that's actually a really interesting case study. So if you look at when EMV was implemented in Europe, that was sort of in the 2000 and 2001 timeframe. And if you think back to 2000 and 2001, Amazon had actually just launched. So you went from zero online fraud because online the online marketplace didn't exist at that time. So naturally, it's true that online fraud increases significantly, but that, I believe, is naturally in line with the explosion of online purchasing in general.
Yeah, I think it's hard to remember when we couldn't buy things online. Seems like 100 years ago.
Right.
Another question about the liability shift, and we didn't go into much detail about it, but someone just wants a little bit more. So in 2015, October, what happens when industries don't switch? Who is liable for fraud? So if you could just kind of go into that one more time.
Right. So the way it works is that the weakest link in the transaction chain is liable for the fraud. So if a merchant has upgraded their point of sale and a cardholder with a magnetic stripe card goes to use that merchant, if there's fraud, then the issuer of that card, of that magnetic stripe card, will be liable for the fraud. Conversely, if a merchant has not upgraded their point of sale to support EMV and a cardholder has an EMV chip card, they use it at the point of sale. If there's some sort of fraud, the merchant would be liable because they have not upgraded their point of sale to support EMV chip.
And this is probably the only way they could get this moving, was to put these kind of parameters out there, I'm sure.
Exactly.
So if someone has wants some practical advice here about special care for the chip. Do customers have to take special care that the chip doesn't get scratched? Will it become unusable?
No. So in the manufacturing process, there's standards around chip durability and chip life expectancy, and so there's actually a set of standards that, as a card manufacturer, you're expected to perform like bend testing to make sure the chip doesn't pop out and things like that. So in terms of life expectancy, it should be no less than the traditional mag stripe card you have in your wallet today. Generally, what you'll probably find is that the chip will last much, much longer than the plastic it's printed on. So the plastic will probably start to fray much earlier than the chip. So if you want to keep your cards out for 10 years, the chip will still work after 10 years, but the plastic will probably not look very good.
So these are a couple small questions to finish up our session. And we will have more webinars where we'll go deeper, even deeper into EMV, and people can ask more questions. So we're not going to leave anybody hanging. We'll do more in the next month or so. This question is, chip cards are protected from RFID scanners and readers, so they're not affected by those.
The RFID scanners?
Yeah, like a scanner.
So I think that goes back to the previous question about whether someone with a contactless EMV card is susceptible to someone try to scan the numbers. And so the answer to that is yes. There was a previous generation of EMV contactless which did have some vulnerability to that sort of attack, but that's not applicable today.
And a question about, do we see Shoreline and Gemalto overall, do we see the majority of banks taking a wait-and-see approach and delaying launching EMV? And are there any surveys about what percentages of banks have launched and when? I know the bigger banks, like I know, the cards are coming out, all the credit cards. But
so I think wait and see is probably not the approach, the general feeling in the marketplace today. Post-Target breach, post-Home Depot breach, I think all banks are moving as quickly as possible to deploy EMV programs. MasterCard, just a few months ago, announced that their prediction in terms of card issuance was close to 575 million EMV cards in market by end of 2015. So clearly there's huge forward momentum.
Yeah, I think I would add to that there may have been some hesitation earlier in the year, especially among smaller issuers with the considerable debit portfolios that needed to be migrated to EMV. But I think that hesitation is pretty much gone right now. Everyone is starting to inquire and move forward with their project. There is a solution for the debit EMV, and almost all of the industry players are now getting behind it and getting ready to support it. So I think the time to start thinking about the EMV program and taking some very concrete steps to move forward with it is now.
Well, that's a perfect way to end, I think, because our hour is just about up, and I want to thank everyone for joining us. And if you have any questions, feel free to contact Shoreline. We can help you. We can give you some EMV assistance one-on-one, and we'll also be having another webinar very soon. Also, I'm going to be sending out a PDF of the presentation, and the questions will come soon after. And we're recording the webinar, and we're going to put it up on our website, so you can go back and listen if you want to get a little bit more deeper information and listen a little bit better. But I want to thank everybody. Thank you, Billy. That was a great presentation. And thank you, Vadim, for all your input.
Thank you.
Thank you. And have
Amy,
a great afternoon.
Thanks so much. Everyone, thanks so much for your attention.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great day.